these are the headlines we're following at this hour. Israel is expanding its ground offensive against Hamas with more troops sent to Gaza. Some members of the international community are calling for a ceasefire amid the worsening humanitarian crisis. But Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu remains opposed to a ceasefire, calling it a surrender. President Yoon addresses the National Assembly on next year's budget proposal, saying the top priority is stabilizing prices and improving fiscal soundness. The president also sought the opposition-controlled parliament's cooperation in pushing for his reforms. Samsung Electronics posted a record operating profits this year in the third quarter as it narrows its losses in semiconductors and holds a strong performance in the mobile sector. The trend is likely to continue into year-end. Good afternoon. We start with the war in Gaza. Israeli forces are expanding their ground operations against Hamas as they rescue a soldier taken hostage by the militant group. Meanwhile, some members of the international community are calling for a ceasefire amid the worsening humanitarian crisis. But Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu remains opposed to a ceasefire, calling it a surrender. Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
An Israeli soldier who was kidnapped by Hamas during the October 7th attack has been rescued as the Israeli Defense Forces, Special Forces, and the Shin Bet Intelligence Agency conducted a ground operation in Gaza on Sunday night. Private Yuri Megadish is the first soldier rescued by Israel since more than 200 people, including dozens of Israeli soldiers, were taken by Hamas. Megadish was a member of a unit of female soldiers in charge of monitoring the Gaza border via surveillance cameras. The Israeli military says she's in good health and has met with her family. Despite the international community calling for a humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will not agree to a ceasefire, as it would be equivalent to surrendering to Hamas and terrorism. During a press conference on Monday, the Prime Minister went on to condemn Hamas for trying to destroy the promise of Israel's future. He added that just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or the September 11th terrorist attack, Israel will continue to fight. Meanwhile, the Israeli military announced on Monday that it had sent additional troops to the Gaza Strip as it strengthened ground operations in the Palestinian enclave. In a statement released by the military, it said that additional troops were deployed as it looks to achieve its war goals. In addition, the military announced that the head of the IDF Southern Command, Major General Yaron Finkelman, went into the Gaza Strip to assess the ground combat situation. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
President Yoon addressed the National Assembly on next year's budget proposal, saying the top priority is stabilizing prices and improving people's livelihoods amid global uncertainties from conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. Delivering the annual budget speech on Tuesday, he urged lawmakers to support the budget bill. Explaining fiscal soundness as the basis, he added the plan will see the budget increase by 2.8% on year, the lowest since 2005. He also said that despite being the lowest increase since 2005, it doesn't just mean spending cuts, but rather efficiently allocating funds to the right areas, such as support for the underprivileged and boosting economic growth. The president called for support for his general agenda, including 3 key reforms such as pension, labor, and education, as well as medical infrastructure reforms. South Korea saw an increase in all 3 of its industrial activity indexes in September, largely driven by a jump in chip production. Now, eyes are on whether this could lead to an economic recovery in the second half of the year. Our Park Go-nu has the details.
South Korea's overall industrial production, spending, and investments all saw a jump in September. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday, the total industrial production increased 1.1% in September compared to the month before. This was mainly due to increased production in the mining and manufacturing sectors of 1.8% on month.
as mining and manufacturing production increased by 3.1% in Q2 and 1.9% in the third quarter, it seems like a positive sign of recovery in the second half of the year compared to the first half.
Although auto production plunged in September, chip production, including memory semiconductors, rose around 13% compared to August, driving growth in the industry. The service industry was also up by 0.4% due to rises in the wholesale and retail sector, while sports and leisure saw a drop. Retail sales, which is a key gauge of private spending, jumped on month, especially as sales of food and beverages and cosmetics increased. A Statistics Korea official said food and beverages saw an increase during the Chuseok holiday period. Infrastructure investment also saw an increase of over 8%, as investment in machinery and transportation equipment both jumped. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics posted record operating profits this year in the third quarter as it narrows its losses in semiconductors and holds a strong performance in the mobile sector. The trend is likely to continue into the year-end. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics finally surpassed the trillion Korean won mark for its operating profits for the first time this year, despite a sluggish time for the chip sector. On Tuesday, the company reported an operating profit of just under 2.5 trillion won for the third quarter of the year, which at the current rate is around $1.86 billion. While this is more than a 77% drop compared to the same period last year, it's a vast improvement compared to the previous quarters this year. In the first quarter, the firm recorded an operating profit of just over 640 billion Korean won, or $475 million, followed by 668.5 billion Korean won, or $496 million. Sales in the third quarter fell by over 12% on year. These latest figures were mainly attributed to high performance in the mobile and display sector and a lower than expected deficit in the company's semiconductor division. Samsung's DS division, which deals with chips, reported that they were $2.78 billion in the red in the third quarter, marking the third quarter in a row that it has recorded a deficit. However, owing to the rising average sales price of DRAM chips, the deficit was around $445 million lower than the previous quarter. The latest figures released by Statistics Korea on the same day show that semiconductor production in South Korea jumped by nearly 13% on month in September, showing that demand for chips is continuing to improve and the firm can expect to continue its recovery in the final quarter of the year. Meanwhile, Samsung's MX division, made up of mobile communications and consumer electronics, patched up the losses made in the chip sector, with its foldable smartphones Galaxy Z Flip 5 and Fold 5, as well as wearable devices showing continued popularity. The display division also reported a large jump in profits with its small to medium-sized panels. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
It's been over a year since South Korea launched its digital platform gov't, which aims for more user-friendly administrative services. What has been achieved so far and what still needs to be done? Our Shin Ha-young spoke with the head of the Presidential Committee on the body.
Enabling people to receive services tailored to their needs by integrating information and data across the private and public sectors. This is what the Yoon administration has been focusing on through the Digital Platform Government Initiative, or DPG. First launched in September last year, a presidential committee on the digital platform government spent its first year creating an action plan.
The claiming process for actual medical expenses insurance will be simplified. Policyholders had to visit hospitals to obtain related documents and submit them to the insurance company. Similarly, for export companies, the process of applying for trade financing has been simplified by enabling electronic submission of documents from the Korea Customs Service to financial institutions.
These efforts have extended abroad. During President Yoon's state visit to the Middle East last week, South Korean tech giant Naver struck a deal with the Saudi Arabian government to create a digital twin platform, a virtual geospatial model of the real world for urban planning and management in 5 Saudi cities.
Establishing and disseminating a digital twin is part of the digital platform government's plan. The latest deal is the outcome of cooperation between the government and a private company. It is meaningful as it is the first export case of the digital platform government.
In terms of digital infrastructure, Ko says South Korea is a global powerhouse. But he thinks the country falls short in utilizing digital technology, which is the reason for creating the world's first use case of hyperscale AI across government departments.
We are creating a hyperscale AI for the government using refined data and reinforcement learning from human feedback, specifically from public officials. This can be used for data analysis and policymaking and addressing social welfare issues. It can be also used to prevent accidents like the Itaewon tragedy by analyzing traffic data to proactively identify potential risks in densely populated areas.
Last September, the South Korean government published what it calls the Digital Bill of Rights. Ko says that the DPG and the Digital Bill of Rights are inseparable.
The digital platform government plans to demonstrate the Digital Bill of Rights, focusing on improving people's welfare and rights. To alleviate concerns about misusing personal information, we'll establish a system that enables citizens to transparently verify how and where their data is shared and utilized within the government.
Under the theme of government innovation with the digital platform government, there will be an exhibition in November showcasing the achievements of the DPG and demonstrating how it'll shape the future of the government. 신하영, Arirang News.
A case of lumpy skin disease was reported in Changwon, Gyeongsangnam-do Province for the first time on Monday. 29 cattle from the farm have been culled due to the outbreak. Agricultural authorities say after examining 20,000 cattle in 454 farms within a 10-kilometer radius, no other cases have been reported. As of Monday, cases of lumpy skin disease have been reported at 67 locations. The government plans to complete the vaccination of the cattle by November 10th, but says the number of cases will likely rise as it takes around 3 weeks for vaccinated cattle to form antibodies. An additional 2.1 million doses of the vaccine are set to arrive in Korea on Tuesday. South Korea and the United States are conducting a large-scale joint aerial exercise this week. The drills are aimed at better preparing the allies for actual combat, but may trigger a provocation by North Korea as a protest against them. Choi Min-jung reports.
Seoul and Washington are currently conducting round-the-clock aerial drills dubbed Vigilant Defense in the skies around the Korean peninsula. The 5-day exercise, which kicked off Monday, involved some 130 South Korean and U.S. aircraft, including Seoul's F-35A fighters, the E-737 airborne early warning and control aircraft, and the KC-330 transport plane, as well as Washington's F-35A and F-35B fighters. The exercise is aimed at enhancing the Allies' combined operational capabilities against North Korea's military provocations.
South Korea and the U.S. Air Force plan to master wartime operation procedures and check operational capabilities.
This is being done through drills which include combat formation, defensive counter-air drills, airborne alert interdiction, and close air support operations. Colonel Kang Geun-shin, the director of the exercise, had previously said the intensive training is similar to actual combat and will allow the Allies to respond to any provocation by the enemy. That being said, there is growing speculation that North Korea may stage missile launches in a show of discontent with the joint drills.
It is highly likely that North Korea will carry out various forms of provocation during this training period to create insecurity on the Korean peninsula.
North Korea, which has previously called such drills rehearsals for invasion, launched missiles during last year's Seoul-Washington joint air exercise. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea has become a global cultural powerhouse on the back of K-pop and other K-content. And the nation's new culture minister Yoon says he will make Korean culture more accessible both at home and abroad. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin has more.
It's been a busy 3 weeks for South Korea's new Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism, Yoon. Since taking office earlier this month, he's been crisscrossing provinces, engaging with industry officials. This is his second term as culture minister, having previously served from 2008 to 2011. Back in the role, Yoo says he will make Korean culture more accessible both domestically and on the global stage. On the domestic front, he's prioritizing the transformation of regions outside Seoul into vibrant cultural hubs. This involves establishing more state-run performing arts companies and what's called the Local 100 project, which spotlights 100 landmarks, cultural assets, and artisans.
We aim to engage with people who are eager to participate in this project, enabling them to immerse themselves in the unique culture, cuisine, and products of each region. This initiative is expected to breathe new life into regions outside the capital.
Globally, Minister Yoo envisions enhancing the competitiveness of Korean content by providing support for content creators to safeguard their intellectual property rights, as well as allocating 1.7 trillion Korean won, or $1.3 billion for content creation next year. When asked about his top priority, his answer was amending the Copyright Act.
The revision should take into account the interests of content creators, producers, streaming services, and other involved stakeholders. I'll constantly engage, discuss, and communicate with these parties.
Based on these, the Culture Ministry will lay out detailed policies for each sector by the end of this year. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
The death toll from Hurricane Otis, which hit the Mexican resort city of Acapulco last week, has risen to 45. The governor of Guerrero State in Mexico said on Monday local time that 45 people have died, including 3 foreigners from the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and that 47 people are still missing. The hurricane damaged 220,000 homes and 80% of hotels along Acapulco's coast. The governor added almost 17,000 rescuers have been deployed in the region, and some areas remain without electric power and water. Otis made landfall in Acapulco early in morning on October 25th, with winds of 266 km per hour, putting the hurricane at Category 5, the most severe hurricane category.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Hong Kong, 4 former student leaders were sentenced to 2 years in prison on Monday for charges of inciting violence through their praise of a man who stabbed a police officer. The 4, Kinson Chung, Charles Kwok, Chris Todorovsky, and Anthony Yoon, are being held responsible for passing a motion in a students' union council that expressed deep sadness and appreciated the sacrifice of Leung Kin-fai, a man who took his own life on July 1, 2021, after stabbing a police officer. They were originally charged with advocating terrorism under Beijing's national security law imposed on Hong Kong following the 2019 pro-democracy protests. This charge was dropped after they pleaded guilty last month to the current charge of incitement to wound with intent. Beijing's security law has prosecuted and silenced most activists in Hong Kong who were involved in the pro-democracy protests. The Chinese government says the law brought stability to the city after the period of unrest. In Europe, Spanish authorities announced Monday the seizure of some 720 kilos of cocaine hidden among scrap metal in a truck. Police said the drugs arrived in the southern port city of Malaga from Costa Rica at the end of September. The cocaine was hidden in a safe buried under piles of metal scraps in the truck's container. Police had to use drills and tweezers in order to uncover the illegal cargo. Spanish authorities said that 8 people were arrested across the Andalusia region in connection with the find. The bus is the latest in a series of operations undertaken by Spanish police, adding to the 9.5 tons of cocaine found in containers of bananas from Ecuador in August. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, announced on Monday that its users in Europe will be offered the option to pay and subscribe to ad-free versions of the social media platforms. It is giving this option as a means to comply with the EU's strict data privacy rules. Following an EU court ruling in July to uphold the decision by German antitrust regulators that Meta's data harvesting methods are abusive, the firm had to come up with alternatives to meet Europe's data privacy standards. Starting in November this year, users of the app on desktop browsers can pay around €10, while mobile phone application users will pay around €13 for the advertisement-free subscription. The monthly plan is available for all users in the EU, European Economic Area, and Switzerland. Argentinian football legend Lionel Messi has won the men's Ballon d'Or for the 8th time. In the evening ceremony held in Paris on Monday, the 36-year-old former Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain star, who now plays for Inter Miami, was once again recognized for his contribution to Argentina's victory at the Qatar World Cup last year. He has won the most Ballon d'Or awards in history, 3 more than Cristiano Ronaldo. For women's award, the Ballon d'Or Feminine, the 25-year-old Spain and Barcelona midfielder Aitana Bonmati won it for the first time. Bonmati was recognized for her success in club and country level, including a Women's World Cup win this summer. Meanwhile, South Korean defender Kim Min-jae came 22nd in the men's Ballon d'Or final rankings. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. West Coast and inland areas were covered with thick fog this morning. Commuters had a rough morning commute with a low visibility warning issued at some airports on Korea's west side. That's including Gimpo International Airport and Gwangju Airport. In fact, the capital area, Chungcheongdo and Ulsan could have high levels of dust at times today. As for the temperatures, it's the last day of October, but it feels more like the earlier part of the month. And the foggy start is turning into a stunning afternoon under bright skies. It is a good day for an autumn stroll or an impromptu outing in most places. Afternoon highs are similar to yesterday, hovering in the low 20s. Seoul topping out at 21 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gwangju, Busan, Jeju all topping out at 23 degrees. Then frequent rain is in the forecast in central parts of the country for the rest of the week, with temperatures staying way above the season norms. Then a November chill awaits us next week, so please enjoy the warmth while you can. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
So far, Israel appears to be avoiding a mass ground attack on Gaza. Rather, its forces are using small units to enter northern Gaza and gradually encircle the city. That's similar to the U.S. approach in 2008 in its siege of Iraq's Sadr city, which is a densely populated urban area just like Gaza. This way, Israeli forces may be trying to avoid mass civilian casualties to retain support from the United States and others. Also, the siege tactics can force Hamas to the surface from the underground tunnels if they run out of arms, fuel, or food. The longer the siege, the greater the pressure, which could be just what Israel aims, as Hamas may not be prepared for a lengthy war, given the previous wars have all ended in several weeks. But that would also be a difficult situation for Israel, as analysts say the war could last up to a year. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.